Welcome to Ask Fear and Greed, where we take your questions and do our best to answer them. I'm Michael Thompson, and good afternoon, Sean Aylmer.
Good afternoon, Michael.
Today's question, Sean, comes from Buster via Instagram. And so there's plenty of ways that you can send your question in. It can be Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, or head along to our website, fearandgreed.com.au, and send it on through there. But Buster has gone to Instagram and he says, "Hey, fellas, I have a question about our currency," and he's certainly come to the right place. "What are the major factors that affect the strength of the Aussie dollar?" He goes on to say, "What conditions would we need to see in order for me to get more bang for my buck next time I exchange currency on holiday?" Now, Sean, this is a question that is right up your alley, because it is one that you are constantly whinging about whenever you are planning an overseas trip.
Well, Buster, do not travel at the same time I travel. That's what my main suggestion would be, because I reckon our currency is always weakest when I'm going overseas. Plenty in your question, though. It's a great question, because all an exchange rate is the value of one currency in terms of another. So one Australian dollar will buy 66.6 US cents or thereabouts. The exchange rate has a very direct effect on the prices we pay for imports, if we're buying something for overseas, or how much people overseas pay for or purchase our imports from. So our exports are bought from overseas guys. That's a direct effect. It has an indirect effect on the economic activity and inflation. To answer the question, the short-term drivers of the currency are mostly interest rates and risk sentiment. So higher interest rates in Australia compared to other countries means that Australia is a more attractive destination for investors. So they buy Australian dollars to invest their money in Australia. If Australian rates are lower, then they're less likely to be in Australia. So when we talk about interest rates in the US going down and staying the same in Australia, that should actually help the Aussie dollar. Not that it really has, but it should help the Aussie dollar. The other thing in the short term is risk. So if people think economies are crapping out, they all go to the US dollar. It's kind of the risk-free currency.
Did you just use the term crapping out?
Yeah, that's an economic term.
Oh, I love it. You know what that does? It makes economics accessible.
That's right.
We should have more terms like crapping out. Please, go on. I interrupted you.
So that's short term.
Mm-hmm.
Longer term, interest rates still matter. That's one thing. Commodity prices, that's really important. If people are buying Australian iron ore and coal, they need Australian dollars to pay for it. So they demand more Australian dollars. So if commodity prices going up, people have to pay more, they need more Australian dollars, the demand for Australian dollars goes up, the currency appreciates. Trade flows matter. So we're buying lots of stuff or selling lots of stuff. That means there's more or less Australian dollars in demand. Hence, it goes up or it goes down. In the very short term, so if Buster's going overseas next month, it kind of depends what markets think about interest rates.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there is something which I think we need to talk about, which bear with me on this one, and I thank the Reserve Bank for some help. Don't roll your eyes, Michael. This is good.
I'm not. It's just like, I know that whenever you say, just bear with me on this one, I'm like, oh, dear Lord, we are in for a lesson.
Here we go. So it's something called the purchasing power of parity, a great economics concept. It basically connects the level of exchange rates to the level of prices between economies. The best example is something the economist introduced called the Big Mac Index. Why is it that a Big Mac in one country is more or less expensive than a Big Mac in another country? The actual theory suggests that over time exchange rates adjust so that the cost of an identical basket of goods and services is exactly the same in two countries. So purchasing power of parity says a Big Mac ultimately should cost the same in the US as it does here as it does in Britain. For example, if goods and services in Australia are expensive relative to the same goods in other economies, over time, demand for our goods, the expensive ones, should decrease. That lowers the demand for Australian dollars, causes the Australian dollar to depreciate. When it depreciates, it means that basket of goods, the Australian goods and services, equalises with other countries. It basically, purchasing power of parity states that the process of adjustment occurs until Australia's goods and services are no longer expensive relative to those in other countries. It's the theory, so let's put it into practice. The Economist Big Mac Index.
Okay,
Last
All right.
updated, July 2024, end of July 2024. So the US is the base currency. A Big Mac in the US costs $5.69 US.
Yep.
In Britain, it costs £4.59. On the purchasing power of parity, the implied exchange rate is 0.81. That's 4.59 on 5.69. The difference between this and the actual exchange rate is 0.78, suggests the British pound is overvalued. Take the Australian. So what it says for us is that our Big Macs are cheaper than the Big Macs in the US. I don't know how much Big Mac is here, but they're $5.69 in the US. What the purchasing power of parity says is that the Australian dollar is actually undervalued by about 11% against the US dollar.
So basically, for Buster, if he wants to travel overseas, just put all of your holiday savings into Big Macs.
You sort of, yeah, I didn't think I was going there, but I'm happy to go there.
I just, poor Buster. Poor Buster has asked a simple question here about how do I make sure I get the most bang for my buck when I travel on holidays. And we have gone down an economics rabbit hole. And
Buster,
you
it's
know
great,
what?
isn't it?
You know what, Sean? I've actually enjoyed this.
Have you? Well, so can I tell you, Buster, what I do when I travel overseas? Because normally when you travel overseas, you know months in advance. I'm sort of dull, and what I do, so let's say I'm going to take $1,000. Let's say I'm going to take $3,000 overseas. I buy, and let's say I'm going to the US. I buy $1,000 now. I don't buy $1,000 halfway between now and the point I'm going, and I buy $1,000 at the end when I am going, because then I'm never fully right and I'm never fully wrong. Spread the risk.
That's that is sage advice.
Sage. Don't try and measure, like, foreign currency is just too hard. I think Alan Greenspan famously said, flip a coin, and you got as much chance of getting that right as knowing whether the US dollar is appreciating or depreciating. So spread the risk. Buster, spread the risk.
That makes a heck of a lot of sense. And look, I think that is a real kind of little pearl of wisdom that Buster can take away from this. I feel like,
if he's still listening,
it was a wild ride, but I feel like we really got somewhere of value towards the end.
Maybe. And buy yourself a Big Mac. Cheaper in Australia.
Big Macs, economy's crapping out. What was the other thing that you said? Averaging it out, kind of, there's something about the risk there at the end.
Mitigate your risk.
There we go.
Half right, half wrong.
There we go. Look, you know what? I think we've done it. Thank you, Buster, for the question, and thank you, Sean, for answering it.
Thank you, Buster. Thank you, Michael.
And if you've got something that you would like to know, then please send through your question on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, or at fearandgreed.com.au, which is also where you can sign up for our free weekly newsletter where we feature one of these questions every week. I'm Michael Thompson, and this is Ask Fear and Greed.